In 479 BC on the island, an Athenian command of Selauncelor named Lycidas stood before his people and suggested accepting a peace offer from the Persian Empire. The Greeks did not debate him. They surrounded him and stoned him to death right on the assembly floor. Why was the birthplace of democracy reduced to this ruthless, zero-tolerance mindset? Because they were traumatized people pushed to the absolute edge of extinction. To understand this fury, we must look back at the shadow hanging over Greece. Years prior, King Darius the Great sought to conquer them and failed. His successor, Xerxes I, had returned with the largest army in the world to finish the job and burn Athens to ash. The devastating sacrifice of the 300 Spartans at Thermopylae was still a fresh, bleeding wound in the collective memory. Diplomacy was dead. This brutal thirst for absolute vengeance set the stage for history's most savage climax. The Battle of Plataea. How did a broken, desperate alliance of survivors turn the tide to annihilate a global superpower? To truly understand the why behind the carnage at Thermopylae, we have to look east and shed our modern biases. For a long time, pop culture has painted the Persians as a mindless horde of slaves driven by whips. But that is pure propaganda. In reality, the Persian Empire was a technological and professional superpower that functioned like a perfect war machine. Xerxes didn't just lead an army. He commanded a marvel of engineering that reshaped the very face of the earth. To ensure his path was clear, he ordered a mile-long pontoon bridge to be built across the Hellespont, literally connecting the continents of Asia and Europe. He even had his men dig a massive canal through a peninsula to help his fleet avoid treacherous coastal storms. Imagine looking at the horizon and seeing tens of thousands of sails blanketing the Aegean Sea, while the dust rising from millions of marching feet turned the sky gray. This machine was fueled by a professional force of 70,000 to 300,000 elite soldiers. At its heart were the Immortals, a heavy infantry unit so disciplined that if one soldier fell, another immediately took his place, creating the terrifying illusion of an undying army. Beside them rode the Saka horse archers, legendary warriors from the Central Asian steppes who could accurately shoot through tiny gaps in armor while galloping at full speed. But what drove this massive engine? Vengeance. Xerxes was on a divinely ordained mission to revenge the humiliation his father, Darius, suffered at the Battle of Marathon 10 years earlier in 490 BC. He wasn't just invading. He was coming to devour the world's first democracy to restore his family's honor. Persia was a tsunami of discipline and boundless ambition. Faced with this professional killing machine, the clock was ticking for the West. What could Greece, a collection of fragmented, arguing, and fearful city-states, possibly do to stop this overwhelming force? If the Persian Empire was a machine of gold and engineering, Sparta was a machine of bone and bronze. To understand how 300 men could stand against a global superpower, we have to look at their software. The psychological conditioning that began at birth. In Sparta, a child's life didn't belong to their parents. It belonged to the state. Elders inspected every newborn, and if a child was deemed weak or imperfect, they were abandoned on a hillside to die. Survival was the very first test of a Spartan's life. At the age of 7, the survivors were torn from their mothers to enter the agoge, a brutal, decade-long forge designed to refine a boy into a living weapon. Picture a child trembling in the night forest, deliberately starved by his masters to force him to learn how to steal food just to endure. If he was caught, he was viciously punished, not for the crime of stealing, but for the incompetence of being discovered. They were beaten until they learned to crush their own cries, and remain silent in the face of agonizing pain. This iron discipline culminated in the philosophy of the 60-pound bronze shield. A Spartan could lose his helmet or his breastplate, but to lose his shield was the ultimate disgrace, because while armor protects the individual, the shield protects the entire line. Mothers would hand this heavy bronze plate to their sons with a final chilling command: return with this shield or lie upon it. The Spartans were not born. They were forged in blood and trauma to become a living wall. But as King Leonidas prepared to march towards certain death, he made a specific, calculated choice that still haunts historians. Why did he only choose 300 men who already had living children for this suicide mission? In the world of military strategy, we call this tactical geography. Thermopylae, or the Hot Gates, was not just a path. It was a place where the earth itself executed a sentence that no human commander could overturn. Imagine a 15-meter corridor, at its narrowest only 15 to 25 meters wide, squeezed between the towering vertical Kalidromos cliffs and the deep, unforgiving sea. In this narrow space, the king god's millions became a liability rather than an asset, because the terrain forced his massive army to attack on a front only wide enough for a few hundred men at a time. This was the ultimate test of hardware versus hardware. The Greeks were the tanks of the ancient world, encased in bronze from chin to knee. They stood behind 3-foot bronze shields, hoplons, and thrust 8-foot spears, dories, with industrial efficiency. Contrast this with the Persians, who carried rattan or wicker shields, and much shorter spears. It was quite literally bronze versus wicker. The Persians often died before they could even get close enough to strike a blow. To make this defensive wall even more impenetrable, the Greek phalanx acted like a literal meat grinder. Using a constant rotation technique, fresh soldiers would cycle to the front, while tired ones moved to the back, ensuring the wall of bronze remained energetic and fresh. As the cliffs rose steeply above the carnage, a forest of spears jutted out from the shield wall like the teeth of a devil. Xerxes, watching the slaughter from a golden throne on a nearby hill, was reportedly so terrified and frustrated by the sight of his elite immortals being butchered that he jumped from his throne 3 times. He was witnessing the impossible, a global superpower being held at bay by a handful of men. But if the terrain was this perfect, what catastrophic flaw was about to turn this fortress of bone and bronze into a mass grave? For 2 days, the bronze wall of the Greeks remained impenetrable. Xerxes was stalled, furious, and running out of options. But then a figure stepped out of the shadows. Not a Persian soldier, but a local Greek man named Ephialtes. Driven by the promise of a massive reward, he showed the Persians the misty Anopaia Trail, a secret mountain path that wound like a serpent through the heights to emerge behind the Greek lines. On the night of the 2nd day, while the main camp rested, the torchlight of the immortals flickered through the dark mountain forest. Guarding this critical path were 1,000 Phocian soldiers. As the Persians ascended, the Phocians were alerted by a sound that has become legendary in military history: the rustling of oak leaves under the feet of thousands of marching men. Panicked and thinking they were the primary target, the Phocians retreated to higher ground, effectively abandoning their post and leaving the Hot Gates wide open from the rear. When a runner reached Leonidas at dawn with the news that they were surrounded, the tactical situation was clear. The defensive mechanism was broken. However, Leonidas's response wasn't a senseless suicide. It was a calculated rearguard action. To ensure that the bulk of the Greek army, nearly 4,000 men, could escape to fight another day, Leonidas ordered them to retreat while he stayed to hold the pass. He was not alone. Alongside the 300 Spartans, 700 Thespian soldiers heroically refused to leave, choosing to stand and die for the freedom of Greece. This moment proves a tragic truth. A fortress rarely falls because of the enemy's strength. It falls because of the betrayal of its own kind. As the final hour approached, Leonidas gave his men one last famous instruction. Eat a hearty breakfast, for tonight we will have dinner in hell. But what exactly did those final moments look like when the bronze finally shattered? As the dawn of the third day broke, the air at Thermopylae changed. It was no longer the crisp salt air of the coast, but the heavy metallic scent of a slaughterhouse. Leonidas knew the end had arrived. He led his remaining 1,500 men, 300 Spartans, 700 Thespians, and 400 Thebans, out into the wider part of the pass for one final desperate charge. This wasn't a defensive maneuver anymore. It was pure, unadulterated vengeance. The combat was brutal beyond words. When their 8-foot spears finally shattered against the weight of the Persian tide, the Greeks drew their short swords. When those blades chipped and broke against shields and bone, the Spartans did the unthinkable. They fought with their bare hands and teeth, tearing at the enemy in a primal bloodstorm. At the heart of this chaos, Leonidas fell early in the fighting. The struggle over his remains was so fierce that the Greeks reportedly rallied 4 separate times to recover his body from the Persian grasp. Exhausted and dwindling in number, the survivors retreated to Kolonos Hill for their final stand. Here, the king-god Xerxes displayed what many historians view as a final act of frustration, or perhaps cowardice. Not daring to let his infantry get any closer to the demons, who had already claimed 20,000 Persian lives, he ordered his archers forward. A rain of arrows so dense it blotted out the sun finally finished off the remaining heroes. When the dust settled, 4,000 Greek bodies lay among the rocks. Xerxes, consumed by a barbaric rage because his glory had been so deeply shaken, ordered Leonidas's head to be chopped off and his body crucified. It was a hollow gesture intended to dishonor a king, but under the setting sun it only served to cement Leonidas's immortality. While the hot gates had fallen, the sacrifice was a strategic masterpiece. Those 3 days bought the time necessary for the Greek fleet to regroup and eventually save Western civilization. Today, a simple stone stands at the hot gates, bearing the immortal words of the poet Simonides. Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here obedient to their laws we lie. This wasn't a boast of glory, but a testament to the moral power of a people who valued duty above life. While Thermopylae was a tactical defeat, it was a massive strategic victory. A necessary stepping stone that bought the time needed for Greece to eventually annihilate the Persian threat at Salamis and Plataea. History is not just written by the victors, it is forged by those who refuse to submit to tyranny. But the story doesn't end in the blood-soaked dirt of the past. A year later, the historical loop closed when 10,000 Spartans, the largest elite force they had ever mobilized, marched north to truly rise up and avenge their 300 brothers. If you've stayed with us to witness this legendary defiance, you are a true history enthusiast. To ensure you don't miss our deep dive into the hidden truths of the massive slaughter at Plataea, subscribe and hit the notification bell now to join our global community and help us keep these forgotten stories alive.